At 67, Lyle Odegaard owned a rented room over a feed store, a truck that only started downhill, and a bag of tools his own son had already tried to sell. The county had been trying to give away the flooded 90 acres for years. It went under to the fence posts every April and baked to white alkali by July. And when the auctioneer offered it free to anyone willing to cover the back taxes, the room stayed quiet, so Lyle counted out $411 and signed his name. His son said it was the dumbest thing he had ever done, and most of the town agreed. Then, on a cold night in October, Lyle backed his truck down to the water, with 2 beavers and a livestock crate. Nobody understood what he was doing. By the second summer, they were driving out to see it for themselves. The creek had a name and a bed and a bridge across it, and by the third week of August, it had nothing else. Lyle stood in the middle of it in his work boots and never wet a soul. Gray plates of dried mud curled up at the edges and cracked under his heel. 40 years back, he had stood on the same bend in June and measured 260 cubic feet a second going by, and it had made enough noise that 2 men standing together had to raise their voices. Now a grasshopper came off the bank, and he heard the whole flight of it. He walked the dry bed down to the culvert and back, out of habit more than anything, because his legs had done it 10,000 times and did not need to be told. Then he climbed out, got in the truck, and let it roll down the grade until the engine caught. The room he rented sat over the feed store on the north end of town, $140 a month, and Nadine Quilici knocked 30 off that if he swept the store and broke down pallets on Saturdays, which he did. It had a bed, a hot plate, and a window that looked at the grain elevator. Under the bed was a milk crate with 41 pocket notebooks in it, one for every year he had worked as a ditch rider for the irrigation district. Water levels, gate settings, dates, weather, in pencil, in his own cramped hand. Nobody had ever asked to see them. He had never thrown one away. He had been retired 6 years. His wife had been gone 4, and 2 winters ago he had gone off a ladder cleaning the elevator's gutters for $40 and spent 11 days in the hospital in the next county with a broken hip and a morphine drip. He came out to find the home place sold, 40 acres, and the house Corinne had wallpapered twice. His son had power of attorney because Lyle had signed it in the emergency room, without his glasses on. The numbers, Garrett said afterward, had not left room for sentiment. There was a second mortgage and a hospital bill and a truck payment, and after all of it cleared, there was $1,100, which Garrett handed over in an envelope like a man returning a borrowed jacket. Lyle had not raised his voice. That was the part people found strange later. Nadine was at the register when he came in, running a tape on a stack of invoices, reading glasses shoved up into her gray hair. "You're dusty," she said. "I walked the creek." "There's no creek to walk. That's what I went to see." She tore the tape off and set it aside. "Well, mail came. There's one for you." It was a folded county notice, the kind they mailed to everybody with a rural route address. Delinquent property sale, second Tuesday of the month. Courthouse Annex, 10 in the morning. 14 parcels. He read down the list standing at the counter with his hat still on. Parcel 14, 90 acres, 6 Mile Creek bottom. "You looking at something?" Nadine asked. "The Hanson bottom's on here again. That's the 4th year. Nobody's going to take that." "No," Lyle said. "I don't imagine anybody is." He folded the notice into quarters and put it in his shirt pocket and stood there long enough that Nadine looked up from her invoices. "Lyle, I heard you," he said, and went upstairs. He did not sleep much that night. He lay with his hands folded on his chest and did arithmetic he already knew the answer to. $411 in back taxes and penalties. He had $630 in an envelope taped under the bottom drawer of the dresser, and no other money anywhere in the world. At 2 in the morning he got up, pulled the milk crate out from under the bed, and found the notebook from 1994. He turned pages until he found a week in April where he had written the same 3 words at the bottom of 4 days running. "Bottom is holding." He sat on the floor with his back against the bed frame and read it 3 times. The courthouse annex smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. 20-some people had come, mostly men who bought tax parcels on a hunch and $100, and 2 women from the title company, and a kid with a laptop who bid on everything and won nothing. Lyle sat on the end of the third row with his hat on his knee. The first 13 parcels went in under an hour, a quarter section with a collapsed barn, a strip of frontage on the highway, 2 town lots behind the school that a contractor took for $900. Then the auctioneer squared his papers. Parcel 14, he said. 90 acres more or less on the creek bottom. 8 years delinquent. County's carried it since the estate closed. Nobody moved. I'll be honest with you people, because I'd rather be honest than sell it twice. The auctioneer said, no crop will stand in it, and no cow will graze it, and it will cost you money in taxes every year you own it. It floods to the fence posts in April, and it's white as a salt flat by July. Opening bid is the back taxes, $411. The room made the sound a room makes when nobody is going to say anything. 411, the auctioneer said again, without much hope in it. Lyle stood up. He had not planned to stand. He had planned to raise a hand, and then his legs did the other thing, and once he was on his feet in a room of seated people, there was no graceful way back down. I'll take it, he said. Somebody near the window laughed, one short bark, and then stopped when nobody joined him. The auctioneer looked at him for a second longer than the job required. Name? Odegaard. Lyle, you understand what I just said about it? I heard every word. Going once, twice. The gavel came down flat. Sold. The clerk was a young woman with a cardigan over her shoulders in August because the county kept the annex at 64 degrees. She wrote his name on the receipt and then set her pen down. Sir, she said, I have to ask you again for the record. You understand there's no road access maintained to this parcel, no well, no power, and the county isn't obligated to do anything about the flooding. I understand. And you're paying cash. I am. He counted it out on the counter in 20s and one 10 and one crumpled one, and she counted it again, and neither of them said anything while she did. Then she stamped the receipt and handed it across, and because she was young, and it had been a long morning, she said, Congratulations, I guess. Thank you, Lyle said, and meant it. Garrett was standing beside the truck in the gravel lot when he came out. White pickup with the outfit's name on the door, engine running, air conditioning going to waste. He was 41 and he wore a company vest in August, and he had his mother's chin, which Lyle noticed every single time and never once mentioned. Tell me you didn't, Garrett said. Lyle unlocked his door. Dad, tell me you did not just buy that bottom. I bought it. Garrett put both hands on top of his head and turned a half circle in the gravel and came back around. Do you have any idea what you just did? I bought 90 acres for $411. You bought a liability. It's not land. It's a swamp with a tax bill. You've got what, $600 to your name? You just set fire to 2/3 of it. That's about right. This isn't funny. I'm not laughing, Lyle said. You are the one doing the yelling in a parking lot. Garrett dropped his hands. When he spoke again, his voice had gone flat and careful, which was worse. I put that parcel on Vance's desk in March. Lyle stopped with his hand on the door. 8 months I've been walking that file up the chain, Garrett said. Do you know what that means? That was mine. That was the one thing I've done in 4 years that anybody upstairs noticed. And you just walked into a county auction in your church shirt and took it for $400 because you're bored. What does an alfalfa outfit want with a bottom that won't grow alfalfa? Garrett's jaw moved. That's not your business. It's 90 acres of my business as of about 4 minutes ago. Sell it to us. No, you haven't heard a number. I don't need to hear a number. Lyle opened the truck door and the heat came out at him. I didn't buy the ground, Garrett. I bought what runs under it. His son stared at him. For a moment, something moved across his face that was not anger, something closer to being tired, and Lyle almost said, one more thing. Then Garrett got in the white pickup and backed out fast enough to throw gravel against the fender of somebody's parked car. Lyle stood in the lot until the dust settled. Then he got in and let the truck roll down the slope of the parking lot until it fired. He stopped at the pump on his way out of town. Merle Bittner's flatbed was at the other side of the island with a stock rack on it, and Merle was leaning on the fender with his arms crossed, and when he saw who was pumping fuel on the other side, he turned and looked at the highway instead. They had not spoken in 30 years. Not one word. Nadine came out with the receipt book and stood between the two trucks and pretended, for about the 300th time in 30 years, that this was a normal arrangement between grown men. "You're on the news, Lyle," she said. That was fast. "Marilyn was at the annex for her cousin's lot. She called me before you were out of the parking lot." Nadine tore off his slip. 90 acres. 90 acres. "Is there something in it?" "No," he said. "There's nothing in it. That's sort of the point." On the far side of the island, Merle uncrossed his arms. 22 head Thursday, Merle said, not to Lyle, to the air over the pumps. 22 Thursday and 30 more the week after, and by the 1st of the month I'm out of the cow business at 74 years old. Nadine's face changed. "Merle, no. Well is pumping sand." He said it evenly. He had said it out loud enough times by now to get all the way through it without his voice moving. 320 feet, and it pumps sand. My dad hit water on that place at 38 feet with a hand auger in 1951. 38 feet. Lyle set the nozzle back in the cradle and did not turn around. "I hauled water in a tank all July," Merle said. 2 trips a day. "You know what diesel costs. You know what a man's pride costs, too. But they don't post that one on a sign." "There's programs," Nadine said. "There's drought money." "There's a form," Merle said. "That's what there is." He got in his flatbed and pulled out, and the stock rack rattled all the way to the corner. Nadine looked at Lyle for a long moment. "He know yet?" she said. "About the bottom? He will buy supper." "Lyle." "I know, you know." She said, "You always know. 40 years of knowing and not one word out of you." She snapped the receipt book shut. "Fuel's on me." "No, it's on me," she said, and went back inside and let the screen door bang. He drove out the county road with the windows down because the truck had no air, and the heat came in smelling like burnt grass and cattle. 4 miles out, past where the pavement gave up and turned to washboard gravel, there was a wire gate with no lock on it, and a fence line running east into the flat. He got out and unhooked the wire and drove through and hooked it again behind him. 90 acres. It did not look like anything. That was the first honest thing you could say about it. A wide, low pan of ground, white in patches where the salt came up, gray-green in others where the greasewood had taken hold. In April, it would be a shallow lake with fence posts standing out of it. Right now it was hard pan you could have landed a plane on, with a scattering of dead willow stobs along the lowline, gray and brittle and 40 years past being trees. Down the middle of it, cut straight as a ruled line, ran the ditch. Lyle walked out to it. The sun was going, and the light had gone orange and long, and his shadow ran out ahead of him, 30 feet. The ditch was 11 feet deep and 18 feet across at the top, with banks cut back at a clean angle, and after 4 decades, it had not softened much. Down in the bottom of it there was a thin string of water maybe 2 feet wide, all that was left in August of a creek that had once flooded 120 acres every spring, and then let it down slow all summer. He stood on the edge and looked at it for a long time. Lyle knew the exact bend where the straight part started, because he had made it. He reached into his coat pocket and took out the brass headgate wrench. It was a T-handle about 14 inches long, worn smooth on the crossbar where 41 years of his own hand had polished the metal down to a shine. It fit the square nuts on every gate in the district. When he retired, the district manager had held out a hand for it at the door, and Lyle had said he must have left it in the truck, and then he had gone home and put it in a drawer, and it had stayed his. He walked north along the ditch bank until the straight cut ended and the old creek bed came in from the northeast, meandering, filled in now, only visible if you knew to look for the greasewood, which ran in a long lazy S across the flat where nothing else would grow. Right there. That was where the drag line had sat. He crouched down, put a knee in the dirt, and dug his fingers into the ground in the old channel scar. 2 inches of dust. Then gravel, round and clean, the kind a creek makes over 10,000 years of turning stones over. 4 inches down, it was damp. He held his hand there and did not move. Away off toward the highway, a truck went by and the sound arrived late and thin. "It's still here," he said out loud to nobody in a voice that came out rougher than he expected. "You never went anywhere. You just went under." He sat back on his heels with the wrench across his knee and looked at the 11 miles of straight cut running away south in the last of the light. I'm going to tell you what I did, he said. I've got to say it to somebody, and there's nobody out here. So it's going to be you. He got about 4 words into it. In 1981, I was 23 years old, and the district hired me to run a machine. Then his throat closed and he stopped, and he stayed crouched there in the gravel with his hand flat on the damp ground and the light going purple over the rimrock. And after a while he stood up with both hands on his knee for leverage. No, he said, not to you. You already know. He drove home in the dark with the headlights picking up jackrabbits. For 11 days he did nothing anybody could see. He borrowed a surveyor's hand level and a folding rod off a man at the district shop who owed him a favor from 2009, and he bought a fresh pocket notebook at the drugstore for $2.40. And every morning at first light he drove out and walked the 90 acres. He walked it in strips, north to south, the way you mow a lawn. 200 paces, sight the rod, write the number, turn, come back. He was not mapping the land. Lyle knew that land already. He was mapping where the water used to go. The old channel showed up in the greasewood, in how the ground gave under a boot heel, in a long shallow trough you could not see unless you got down low and looked across it with the sun behind you. There were 7 of them. 7 old braids of 6 Mile Creek, filled in and forgotten, running across that flat in curves the machine had never touched, because the machine had only cut the middle. On the 9th day he found the good one. It came off the ditch about 600 feet below the north fence and swung east in a lazy arc for a quarter mile before it faded out. It was 2 feet lower than the ground on either side of it, and the gravel in the bottom of it was clean, and when he put the level on it he got 7 inches of fall in 300 feet. He sat down in it and wrote in the notebook until the pencil went dull. Nadine was scooping dog food out of a barrel when he came in, and she took one look at his face and put the scoop down. "You've got a plan," she said. "I've got a problem." "That's the same thing with you." He laid the notebook on the counter open. "I need something that'll build me about 15 little dams, and then keep building them after I'm dead. I don't have equipment, I don't have money, and I couldn't get a permit to put a shovel in a waterway if I lived to be 110. Nadine looked at the pencil lines for a while. She had run a feed store for 26 years, and she had heard men describe worse plans than this with more confidence. "Beavers," she said. "That's the word. There's a girl from the state been in here twice this summer buying fencing wire and asking about landowners." Nadine went and dug through the mess beside the register. She left a card. "She's got beavers she can't find a home for." The card said Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and had a name on it and a cell number written across the bottom in ballpoint because the printed number was wrong. Delia Fonseca came out 3 days later in a green state pickup with a dented tailgate and got out with a clipboard already in her hand, which told Lyle most of what he needed to know about how the conversation was going to start. She was 34 and she did not waste any time being polite. "You've got a straightened channel, no woody vegetation, no year-round pool, and 8 months of alkali," she said. "I can tell you right now, this is not a release site." "All right. I'm not being rude. I'm saving you a drive to town and me a memo." She flipped a page. "You want the numbers? I've relocated 13 pairs in 3 years. 11 of them failed. 2 of those failures are because somebody shot them and I can't do anything about that. But 9 of them just left. They went downstream and they kept going, and my transmitters quit, and that was that." "Why'd they leave?" The question caught her sideways. She looked up. "Because there was somewhere better," she said. "That's the whole answer. A beaver isn't loyal to a spot, it's loyal to conditions. Deep enough water to get under the ice in January, something green to eat inside 100 yards, and no better water within a couple of miles. You give them 2 out of 3, and they'll walk. They will walk 15 miles overland in a night to find the 3rd one. And if you give them all 3, then I've got 2 out of 13 instead of none," Delia said. "Look, I've got a mated pair sitting in a holding pen in a hatchery outbuilding right now. They came out of a canal headgate 40 miles from here, where they'd plugged an 18-inch pipe 4 times in 2 months. The irrigation company had a nuisance permit signed and a man with a rifle scheduled for Thursday. I begged for them. If I dump them somewhere and they walk, my funding line dies in March, and the next 400 beavers in this district get the Thursday guy." She said it flatly and then looked out at the white pan of the bottom and did not soften it. "So no," she said. "Not here. Come look at something, Lyle said. He walked her out 600 feet below the north fence and stood in the old braid and showed her the clean gravel and the 2 feet of drop and the 7 inches of fall over 300 feet. She crouched and put her hand in it the same as he had. This is an abandoned meander, she said. There's 7 of them. Where's the willow? There isn't any. There's dead stobs. I'll plant it. He turned and pointed at the ditch. That water down in that cut is running past here at about 4 feet a second, and it's 11 feet below where it ought to be. It doesn't touch this ground for 1 day out of the year except in April, and in April it goes over the top of everything at once, and then it's gone in 19 days. I've got the numbers on 19 years of Aprils in a box under my bed. I believe you, Delia said. It's still a straight ditch. I'm going to make it not be. With what? With them, he said. She stood up. Mr. Odegaard, a beaver is not a contractor. You do not get to tell it where to build. I have watched them dam a culvert I needed open 8 times in 6 weeks and ignore 100 yards of perfectly good habitat 40 feet away. They build where they want to build. No, ma'am, Lyle said. They build where they hear it. Delia went quiet. You've got a name for it, he said. I've heard it called the trickle. A beaver hears water running over a lip, and it goes and stops the sound. It isn't thinking about ponds, it's thinking about noise. That's why you can't keep one out of a culvert. The culvert's the loudest thing on the property. That's exactly right, Delia said slowly. That's what a flow device is. We run a pipe through the dam with the intake set way back in the pond so the water leaves quiet and they don't plug it because they can't hear where it's going. You use it backwards. We use it to stop them. Nobody ever asked you to use it forward, Lyle said. She stared at the old braid, and then at the ditch, and then at him. You want to cut a notch, she said. I want to cut 7 of them. Little ones, hand-dug at 7 places I've already picked, spilling out of that cut into these old channels where the gravel is. And I want each one to run over a lip of rock so it sings. He tipped his head toward the ditch. That water down there is running fast and deep and quiet. A 1/4 inch of water going over a rock ledge makes more noise than 11 feet of it sliding down a smooth cut. They'll hear the notch. And they'll dam the notch. They'll dam the notch. And when they dam the notch, the water backs up sideways into that braid, and then that braid is loud, and they'll dam that. And every dam they build pushes water out flat across ground that hasn't been wet since I was a young man. He looked at her. I don't want a pond, Miss Fonseca. Everybody thinks I want a pond. I want a sponge. Delia sat down on the bank and put the clipboard face down in the dirt beside her, which was the first friendly thing she had done since she got out of the truck. Why beavers, she said. You could hire a guy with a small excavator and build 15 structures in 4 days. With what money? Grant money. There's cost share for this. Then let me give you the other reason. Lyle took his hat off and pushed his hair back and put it on again. A dam I build, I have to keep up until I die. It blows out in April, and I'm out there in the mud at 68 years old, with a shovel, and then I'm 70. And then I'm not here. A dam they build keeps itself up after I'm gone. They fix it at 2 in the morning in a snowstorm because they can't stand the sound of it leaking. There's no grant in the world that does that. Delia looked at the ground for a while. I'd want a starter structure at each notch, she said finally. Posts driven in the bed, willow woven between them, about knee-high, gives them something to build onto. Otherwise, they've got to start from bare gravel and half the time they won't. How many posts? 14 or 15 to a structure. Juniper's fine. Green juniper's better. It doesn't rot. There's 400 acres of juniper on the rim I can cut for free with a permission slip. You'd have to drive them by hand. I'd have to drive them by hand, Lyle agreed. She stood up, brushed off, and picked up the clipboard. I'll write it up as a candidate site, she said. That doesn't mean yes. I know what it means. And, Mr. Odegaard, she stopped with her hand on the truck door. If they walk, they walk. I've had people cry on me. Twice. I need you to hear me say now that these animals do not owe you anything. No, Lyle said. I owe them. She drove out slower than she drove in. Merle Bittner's flatbed came up the county road the following Tuesday and stopped crossways in the gate, so nothing could get past it. Lyle was 200 feet out with a post maul, and he set it down head first in the dirt and walked over and did not hurry. "You bought it," Merle said out the window. "I did. For $400. $411. Merle's hands stayed on the wheel. He was 74 and thin through the shoulders in a way he had not been at 50, and he had a scab on the back of one hand from wire. "My place is below you," Merle said. "Whatever you do up here comes down on me. You understand that?" "I understand it better than anybody alive." "That right." Merle's mouth pulled. "You going to farm it?" "No." "Run cattle?" "No." "Then what in the hell are you doing out here every day for 2 weeks with a pencil?" Lyle looked at him for a moment. 30 years is a long time to not say a word to a man whose fence you can see from your own. "I'm going to put beavers in it," he said. The silence went on long enough that a meadowlark got through 2 full songs somewhere behind them. "Beavers," Merle said. "Yes." "You took the water out of this valley with a machine, Lyle." Merle's voice did not go up at all, which was the thing that landed. "Don't stand there in your dead father's hat and tell me 2 rodents are putting it back." Lyle did not answer. Merle put the flatbed in gear and pulled the wheel over and left, and he took the gatepost with him on the way out. And Lyle spent the rest of the afternoon setting a new one. The white pickup came on a Thursday. Vance Clues was in his 50s, and he got out with his sleeves rolled to the elbow and his hand already extended, and he shook Lyle's hand with a grip he had used on 400 other people that month, and remembered 11 of them. "You're Garrett's dad," he said. "That's the one thing about me nobody's got wrong yet." Cluse laughed, and it was a real laugh, and Lyle disliked him slightly less for it. They stood at the tailgate and looked out at the flat. "I'll be straight with you," Cluse said. "We'd like this piece. 9,000, cash, and we cover the closing." "No." 40,000. Lyle turned his head. "That was quick. I don't have time to do the dance, and neither do you, honestly." Cluse put his hands in his pockets. "Mr. Odegaard, I employ 340 people in this county. 200 of them live within 12 miles of where we're standing. I have a board in Sacramento that does not know what alkali is. $40,000 for a piece of ground the county could not give away for 8 years is not an insult. It's a favor with a number attached. What do you want it for?" "Water management." "That's 2 words that mean nothing." Cluse smiled a little. "That's fair." 60,000, he said after a moment. "And I'll put a fence around whatever part of it you want to keep walking on. It's not for sale." "Everybody says that." "I've been poor twice," Lyle said. "Once when I was young and I deserved it, and once now, and I got used to it faster the second time." "There isn't a number." Cluse looked at him a while longer. Then he took out a card and set it on the tailgate under a rock. "When it costs you something," he said, "call me." It always costs something. The bicycle showed up in the 2nd week of October. Lyle was on his knees in the 5th notch with a mattock when he heard the ticking of a freewheel behind him, and turned around, and there was a girl of about 12 straddling a bike in the middle of 90 acres of nothing, 4 miles out of town, with a water bottle in the cage and her hair coming out of a braid. "Are you my grandpa?" she said. Lyle sat back on his heels. "I've got a picture," she said. "It's at my grandma's funeral, so you're wearing a suit, but it's you. It's me. I'm Josie." "I know who you are," Lyle said. "You were 7. I'm 12. She looked past him at the notch. "My dad said you bought a swamp." "He's right. He said you did it to embarrass him." "He's wrong about that part." Josie got off the bike and laid it down in the dirt and came over and looked into the trench he had been digging for 2 hours, which was 11 feet long and a foot deep and did not look like anything. "What is it?" "It's a place for water to make noise." "Why does water need to make noise?" Lyle handed her the mattock, which was heavier than she expected, and she took it anyway. "Sit down," he said. "I'll tell you the whole thing. It takes about 10 minutes and you're going to think I've lost my mind. And then, in about a month, you'll be the only person in this county who understands it." They turned the animals loose on the 22nd of October, a little after 9 at night, with the temperature at 31 degrees and a quarter moon. Delia backed the state truck down the bank and they carried the crate between them the last 40 feet, and it was heavier than Lyle had expected. 60 pounds of animal shifting inside plywood. There was a sound coming out of it that he had never heard before and could not have described, low and grinding, and every few seconds a hard slap against the wall of the box. "They're not scared," Delia said. "That's mad. Mad is better." She set the penlight in her teeth and worked the latch. "Do you want to say anything?" she said around it. "No. People usually do." "Open it," Lyle said. She pulled the door up. For maybe 3 seconds nothing happened at all. Then the first one came out low and fast and did not look at either of them, straight down the gravel and into the black water without any sound at all. And the second one followed it, and there was one wet noise from somewhere out in the dark, and then the creek went back to being a creek. Delia let her breath out. "Okay," she said. They stood there in the cold for a long time, and neither of them said anything, and then they carried the empty crate back up the bank, and Delia wrote 3 lines in a field book by dome light and drove away. Lyle slept in the truck. At first light he walked the whole 90 acres north to south in strips, same as he had for 11 days in August. He walked all 7 notches. He walked both banks of the cut for 1.5 miles in each direction. 3 separate times he got down on his hands and knees and put his face 6 inches off the mud. He walked it twice. There was no track, no cutting, and no mud pushed up anywhere on that ground. Nothing at all. He walked it again the second day. And the third. On the third afternoon, Delia met him at the gate with her arms folded and her jacket zipped to the chin. "I have to call it," she said. "Give it a week. I have to call it at 72 hours. That's the protocol I wrote myself, and if I break my own protocol on the site I picked against my own criteria, the next person who looks at my file gets to say, 'I'm not a scientist, I'm a woman with a favorite old man.'" Her breath came out white. "I'm sorry. I liked the idea. It was the best idea anybody's brought me in 3 years. They didn't die. Probably not. Then they went somewhere," Lyle said. "Where's the loudest water in this valley right now?" Delia opened her mouth and stopped. "October 25th, Lyle said. "Season's closed. Every gate in the district is shut except one, and that one's the waste check 2 miles down, and it's got a concrete apron with a 4-foot drop on it, and right now it is the only place in 40 miles where water falls over a lip and hits rock." He was already walking to his truck. "I put out a notch that trickles and I turned them loose 400 yards from a bandsaw. They found the sign in 11 minutes. Mud pushed up the concrete apron in 2 smooth slides. A cottonwood sapling as thick as a wrist, cut clean at an angle you could have shaved with. And along the base of the check structure, already a mat of sticks and mud 2 feet high across a third of the opening. Delia crouched at the edge of it, with her hands on her knees. "They plugged a district structure in 72 hours, she said. "Do you understand what happens now? Somebody from the district drives by here in April and sees that and calls it in, and it's a nuisance permit and a rifle. And it will be my transmitters in the animals when they do it. Nobody's driving by here till April, which is when the water comes." "Which is when the water comes," Lyle agreed. "So I've got till April." He drove home and did not sleep. At 4 in the morning he got up and took the brass wrench out of the drawer and stood in the dark room turning it over in his hands. Then he drove out. The waste check sat in a concrete box at the bottom of the district's lateral, 6 steel checkboards stacked in slots to hold the water up so it fell over the top and made that clean 4-foot drop. Lyle had set those boards 200 times. He knew the exact grunt of each one. It was 5 degrees above freezing and pitch black, and there was nobody within 4 miles. He fit the wrench on the lift nut and cranked, and the top board came up out of its slot with a screech that carried, and he set it in the grass, then the second, then the third. With 3 boards out, the water quit falling. It slid through the throat of the structure, smooth and level, and the noise went from a roar to a sound you had to stand still to hear. Lyle stood there in the dark with the wrench hanging from his hand and listened to a piece of the district he no longer had any right to touch go quiet. "That's a firing offense," he said out loud, "if I still had a job." Then he drove back to his 90 acres and started hauling rock. He hauled it for 6 days. Basalt off the rim, loaded by hand into the bed of the truck, 1,200 pounds at a trip because the springs would not take more. Then unloaded by hand at the 5th notch. He built a lip across the mouth of it, 18 inches high and 11 feet long, keyed into both banks, with the top course laid flat and level so the water would come over it in a thin sheet instead of a slot. On the 7th morning, he opened the notch with a shovel. Water came out of the ditch, spread across the rock and dropped 1.5 feet onto clean gravel, and it made a sound Lyle had not heard in that valley since he was a young man. Not a roar, a ring, water hitting stone in 100 places at once. He sat down on the bank and listened to it for 2 hours. Josie found him there on a Saturday with mud to her knees and her father's old irrigation boots on. 4 sizes too big and stuffed with newspaper. Did it work? Ask me in a week. Do they have names? No, Lyle said. They're not pets. They're wild animals doing a job and they don't know I exist, and they'd bite through my hand if I gave them the chance. Josie thought about that. Then I'm calling them the crew, she said. Lyle looked at her for a second longer than he meant to. That's a good name, he said. She started a notebook that day because he made her. Date, weather, what she saw, in pencil, and no guessing. She wrote in a round 12-year-old hand and pressed too hard, and by the end of the week she had used up 4 pages, saying nothing had happened. On the 9th night after the rock went in, it froze hard, and in the morning there was a dam. It was 14 feet long and it came up to Lyle's knee, and it was built across the mouth of the 5th notch on the exact line he had picked with a shovel in September. Sticks laid butt upstream and packed with mud the color of chocolate, plastered in from the water side, the whole thing already holding back 8 inches of water that had spread out sideways over a 1/4 acre of ground that had been white alkali 11 days before. They had built it on top of his juniper posts. They had used the starter structure exactly the way Delia said they would. Lyle stood in front of it and did not say anything for a long time. Josie filmed it on a phone with a crack across the screen, walking the whole length of it and narrating in a voice she was trying to keep flat and professional and failing at. It's November 6th, she said to the phone. It's 14 steps long. My grandpa made the water loud on purpose, and they came back up 2 miles and built it here. She sent that video to 4 people. One of them was her father. If you have made it this far into Lyle's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I have been waiting to tell you. The phone rang at 10 that night. Lyle was sitting on the edge of the bed with his boots off and 1 sock in his hand. She was out there alone, Garrett said. 4 miles on a bicycle on a gravel road, with no shoulder and a hay truck every 20 minutes. She was. You didn't call me. She asked me not to, and she's 12, so that one's mine and I'll take it. Lyle pressed the heel of his hand against his eye. She's a good hand, Garrett. She keeps a cleaner notebook than half the men I trained at the district. There was a long space on the line. Did you watch it? Lyle said. I watched it. And it's 14 feet of sticks and mud. Garrett's voice came down out of the anger into something more careful. Dad, I need you to hear one thing, and then I'm hanging up. This stopped being about you and me somewhere around the 2nd week of September. There are people above me who have been working on that basin for 2 years, and they are not mean, and they are not stupid, and they do not lose. Is that a warning? It's a weather report. Garrett. I have to go. Your daughter asked me what the crew was for, Lyle said. Out of everybody in this county, she is the only one who has asked me that. The line stayed open 4 or 5 seconds. Then it clicked off, and the room was quiet, and out the window the light on the grain elevator was burning, same as every other night of the year. Merle Bittner's flatbed came up the county road on the 2nd Sunday of November and stopped at the gate, and this time he got out. He walked out across the flat with his hands in his coat pockets, and he stopped 10 feet short of the dam and looked at it, and then he looked at the 1/4 acre of standing water behind it. And then he looked at the 7 little rock lips Lyle had built down the length of the ditch. Well, he said, Merle, they did that in 1 night. They did that in 1 night. Merle nodded slowly. He looked older out in the open than he did through a truck window. I came up here to ask you something, he said, and I've been sitting in my kitchen since 4 this morning trying to decide if I was going to. So I'd appreciate it if you'd let me get it out. Go ahead. In 1995, I went down to the district office, and I pulled the file on the channel project because my mother's spring had been dry 11 years by then, and I wanted to know who to be angry at. Merle's voice was steady and low. There's a payroll sheet in that file. June through September of 1981. There's 4 names on it, and 3 of them are dead. Lyle did not move. "I came to your shop and I asked you," Merle said. "I said, 'Lyle, was that you on that machine?' And you looked at me and you said, 'It was a job.' And you walked in the house." "I remember." 30 years, Merle said. "I could have swallowed the machine. Machines are machines, and somebody was going to run it, and if it hadn't been you, it would have been some kid from Boise. What I could not swallow was standing in your yard being handled like a salesman." The water rang over the rock lip 40 feet away, and neither of them said anything for a while. Lyle took his hat off and held it in both hands. "I was 23, he said. "I'd been married 4 months. The district had federal cost-share money and 110 days to spend it in. And they needed a man who could read a grade stake and wasn't afraid of a machine, and they offered me $9.60 an hour when I was making $4.20 stacking hay. I know what they paid you." "Then let me finish, because I've had 40 years to look for a better reason, and there isn't one." Lyle's hands closed on the brim of his hat. "I was 23, and the check cleared. That's it. That's the whole reason. I put 11 miles of that creek in a straight line between the 6th of June and the 14th of September, and I dropped the bed of it 11 feet and I collected $2,900. And Corinne and I bought a truck and a bedroom set, and we thought we were doing well." Merle stood there. "Your mother's spring quit in 1984, Lyle said. "I know the year. I know every year. There's a notebook for every one of them. And I watched the whole thing come down like a stair. 1984, your mother's spring. 1988, the 2 seeps below the county bridge. In 1991, the town's number 2 well dropped 9 feet in one season. It's all in a milk crate under a bed above a feed store, and it is all in my own handwriting. You knew that whole time." "I knew before I finished the job," Lyle said. "I knew in August of 1981, I stood on the mats and watched the water quit spreading and go down that cut like it had somewhere to be. And I was 23 years old and I thought, that is going to be a problem for somebody. And then I got in the truck and went home to my wife." Merle turned away and looked out over the flat for a while. "Why now?" he said. "Because there's no reason left not to. There's no house to protect, and no job to lose, and no wife to have to look at me over a supper table." Lyle put his hat back on. "Corinne told me to say it out loud in about 1996. She said it maybe 4 times, and then she quit saying it, which was worse. That sounds like her." It was exactly like her. Merle crouched down at the edge of the new pond and put 2 fingers in the water and held them there for a moment. "This going to work?" he said. "I don't know. That's the first honest thing anybody in this valley said to me since the drought started." Merle stood up, and his knees cracked, and he put his hands back in his pockets. "I'm not forgiving you. I want that clear. And I don't have the standing to forgive you for my mother anyway, because she's 22 years dead. I never asked for it." "No, you didn't." Merle started back toward his truck, and then stopped and turned halfway around. "But I've got a post pounder on a 3-point hitch that's been sitting in a shed since March, and you're driving Juniper by hand like a damn fool, and my cows are gone so my afternoons are wide open." Lyle stood very still. "I'll be up Tuesday," Merle said, and got in his flatbed and left. Delia found the notice on the 18th of November. She had come out to run a transect, and she stopped at the gatepost because there was a laminated placard zip-tied to it that had not been there on her last visit, weather-sealed, official with a state seal in the corner and a file number across the top. She read it twice. Then she got back in the truck and drove out to where Lyle was weaving willow. "Who put this on your gate?" she said. "I don't know. It was there Thursday. I figured it was a weed notice." "It's not a weed notice." Delia held it out. "This is a groundwater mitigation application. Somebody has filed a proposal to designate this parcel as a mitigation site." "Meaning what?" "Meaning that if you want to drill new deep wells in this basin, the state makes you put water back somewhere else first. On paper. You buy or lease a piece of ground with a surface water source, you show the state you're leaving water in the ground there, and they issue you credits, and you use the credits to pump somewhere else." She tapped the placard. "That's what this 90 acres is worth to somebody. It isn't worth anything as land. It's worth a great deal as a permit." Lyle looked out at the flat and the 7 rock lips and the 200 yards of standing water that had not been there in September. "How much water would they have to leave here?" he said. "Enough to satisfy the rule. which for a parcel like this is a pond. One pond, one gauge, one annual photograph. Delia's mouth was tight. And then 4 new wells 600 feet deep, 3 miles from here. That's legal. That's completely legal. I've watched it done 11 times. The certified letter came on the 2nd of December. Nadine brought it up the stairs herself instead of leaving it with the mail because she had seen the return address, and she stood in the doorway of the room while he opened it. And neither of them pretended she was there for any other reason. It ran 4 pages. Most of it was numbers and statute citations. The part that mattered was on the first page, in a single sentence, and Lyle read that sentence 4 times before it went in. That 90 acres carried a surface water right with a priority date of 1893. The oldest water right in the valley. Older than the town, older than the district, older than every well and every pump and every acre of alfalfa in the basin, which meant that in a dry year, under the law, it got its water first, and everybody else waited. And because no one had put that water to use on that ground in more than 5 consecutive years, a complaint had been filed to have it canceled. A hearing was set for the 4th of March. Well, Nadine said, what is it? They're taking the water right. They can do that. If you don't use it, they can. Lyle turned to the last page. There was a signature block at the bottom, and above it a printed name and a title, and above that the name of the outfit. And the signature itself was a hard forward slash with a loop at the front that he had first seen on a 4th-grade spelling test he had put on a refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a tractor. Lyle folded the letter along its own creases and put it back in the envelope. Bad, Nadine said from the doorway. It's got a name on it. Whose? Mine, Lyle said. Second one down. He pulled the milk crate out from under the bed, laid the envelope on top of 41 pocket notebooks, and slid the crate back with his heel. Then he asked Nadine if she had any coffee downstairs that had not been on the burner since noon, and she looked at him for a second and let him have it. He never called his son about that letter. Not once in 90 days. People asked him about that afterward more than they asked about the beavers. Merle came Tuesday, and every Tuesday after. He brought the flatbed and a tractor with a hydraulic post pounder on the 3-point, and he ran it while Lyle set the posts, and neither of them talked much because the pounder made talking pointless. They put in 406 juniper posts between the middle of November and the end of February. Lyle counted them in his notebook. Merle never asked what the number was, and Lyle never told him. By the first week of December it had gotten around. Nadine put a clipboard on the counter by the register with a sheet on it that said Saturdays, Odegaard Bottom, bring gloves. And by the second Saturday there were 11 people out there, a retired school teacher who cut willow whips with pruning shears in a lawn chair. 2 brothers who ran a well drilling rig and had spent 4 years telling people the news nobody wanted. A young man from the tribe's fisheries office who drove 90 miles each way and would not take gas money. Why are they here? Josie asked, one Saturday, writing the date at the top of a fresh page. Because a well costs $60,000 now and it used to cost $6, Lyle said, and because people would rather do something on a Saturday than read another form. That's 2 reasons and neither one of them is you. That's correct, Lyle said. And that's the good news. By the middle of January there were 4 dams. By the 20th of February there were 9, strung down the old braids in a stair, and behind the top one the water stood 2 feet deep over nearly an acre and did not freeze all the way through even at 11 below, because water moving under ice does not freeze the same as water sitting still. Josie's notebook by then had 40 pages in it. Dam 4 extended 8 feet east, Dam 6 leaking on the north end repaired overnight. Willow cut 61 yards upstream of Dam 2. They are going farther than they used to. She numbered them and dated them, and did not guess, because he had made her promise not to guess. The hearing was on the 4th of March in a state office building 2 hours away, in a room with a folding table and a flag on a stand and a water pitcher nobody touched. Lyle wore the suit from Corinne's funeral. It was loose through the shoulders now. He carried the milk crate in himself. Delia offered twice and he said no both times, and he set it on the floor beside his chair and the company's lawyer looked at it and then looked away. The lawyer was good. That was the thing nobody expects. He was polite and quiet and he did not raise his voice one time in 90 minutes. "The record is straightforward," he said. "The right at issue carries an 1893 priority date for irrigation of 90 acres. There has been no irrigation on this parcel since 1989. There is no ditch, no headgate, no pump, and no crop. Under the statute, 5 consecutive years of non-use is forfeiture. We are at 36 years. My client is not asking this office to do anything except apply the law as it is written." The hearings officer looked over her glasses at Lyle. "Mr. Odegaard, do you dispute that no crop has been irrigated on that parcel since 1989? No, ma'am, there hasn't. Then help me understand your position." "My position is that the water's been putting itself to use out there every April for 36 years, and nobody was standing in it to write it down." Lyle put his hand flat on the milk crate. "I've got 41 years of daily flow numbers on that reach in here. Every one of them's in my handwriting. The district's gauge on that stretch quit in November of 1998, and they never replaced it. So from 1998 forward, there is no other record of what that creek did. There's mine, and there's nothing." The lawyer said, "With respect, a private notebook is not a gauge." "No, sir, it's not," Lyle said. "But your application's Exhibit C has the mean April flow on that reach for 2004. Would you read where that number came from?" There was a pause that went on a little too long. "It's cited to district records," the lawyer said. "The district copied it out of my book in 2011 when they were putting a grant together," Lyle said. "Ask them. They sent a girl over with a photocopier, and she was at my kitchen table 4 hours. Delia went next. She had a fisheries certification and a 2-page memo, and she read most of it flat, and then she stopped reading. "I want to say one thing that isn't in the memo," she said. "Last week I put a temperature logger in the pool behind the 4th structure on that property. 51 degrees. 2 miles downstream in the straightened reach on the same afternoon it was 68. Red band trout stopped feeding at about 70. There has not been a red band caught in that stretch of creek since I was in high school, and I found 11 juveniles in a seine hall on the 11th of February. She set the memo down. "That is a beneficial use. It is a beneficial use in the statute by name. I did not have to make it up." The company's general manager was sitting in the second row in a sport coat. He had not said anything all morning. Garrett was next to him with his hands folded and his eyes on the middle distance, and he did not look at his father once in 90 minutes. And Lyle did not look at him either, and afterward Nadine said that was the hardest part of the whole thing to sit through. The hearings officer took her glasses off at 11:40. "I am not deciding this on paper," she said. "Counsel, I understand your statute, and you have read it correctly. Mr. Odegaard, I understand what you are telling me, and I do not think you are lying. What I do not have is a picture of what actually happens on that ground when the water comes." She closed her folder. "Runoff peaks out there in the second week of April. I will be on that property with my own boots on. If the water does what you say it does, I will find beneficial use, and I will say so in writing. If it does not, I will cancel the right the same day." Out in the parking lot, Vance Cluse caught up to him at the truck. "Mr. Odegaard, I know what you're going to say." "I doubt it." Cluse put his hands in his coat pockets. "I didn't want that filed. I want you to know that. Got outvoted by a room in Sacramento that has never been east of the mountains. Your name's on the top of it." "It is." Cluse did not flinch off it. "I employ 340 people. If I don't get those wells, I dry up 400 acres and I let go about 60 of them, and I will know every one of their names, and 2 of them coach my kids' team." He looked out at the parked cars. "I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. I'm telling you I'm not the man you've got in your head, and neither is your son. My son signed it. Your son argued against it for 6 weeks, and then he signed it because it was his job to sign it." Cluse said, "You can decide what that's worth. It's not nothing." He nodded once and walked off across the lot. The water came up on the 9th of April. Lyle had been sleeping in the truck at the gate for 4 nights by then, and he woke at 2 in the morning to a sound he had not heard since he was a young man, which was 90 acres of ground being filled. By first light, the ditch was running bank full, and the color of coffee with milk in it, and the 7 rock lips he had built in October were gone from sight under 2 feet of moving water. And the whole flat between the fence lines was one sheet of brown water with fence posts standing out of it in a line. At 6:40, the big starter structure at Notch 5 went. He watched it go. He was standing on the high ground at the north fence with Merle beside him and Delia 40 feet off, and the whole thing tore out in about 4 minutes. 6 months of hauled basalt and driven juniper and woven willow. And it went down the cut in pieces, and there was nothing anybody could do but stand there. Delia said a word that she apologized for later. Merle said nothing at all. That was the middle one, Lyle said. His voice came out level, and he was surprised by that. That was the one in the main current. That was the best one you had, Merle said. That was the one I built. The other 8 aren't mine. By 9 in the morning it was clear what was happening. The 9 beaver dams were not in the ditch. They had never been in the ditch. They were strung out through the old braids off to the east where the current never got above a walking pace, and when the ditch went over its banks, the flood did not hit them head on. It came at them sideways and slow, and they held, all 9, and every one of them took that sheet of water and shoved it further east across the flat instead of letting it run south down the cut. By noon there was water standing on ground that had been white alkali in August. By the second day there was water on 70 acres of 90, and none of it was more than 4 inches deep, and it was not going anywhere. The hearings officer came on the 14th and borrowed waders with a young man from her office carrying a camera. She walked it for 3 hours. She did not ask many questions. At the 4th dam she stood in 11 inches of water in the middle of what had been a hardpan flat and looked south down the ditch, and then east across the sheet of water, and then she wrote in a small notebook for a long time. "Mr. Odegaard," she said, "in your best judgment, where is this water going?" "Down," Lyle said. "There's about 9 feet of clean river gravel under this flat. It's the old bed. It's been sitting there dry as a sponge on a shelf for 44 years. And it comes back out where? Bittner's place first. Then the 2 seeps under the county bridge. Then the creek in August, if we get enough years." "When?" "I don't know," Lyle said. "That's the honest answer. Could be 4 years. Could be 12. She wrote that down too. Merle's well came back on the 26th of June. It did not come back all the way, and it did not come back with any drama. What happened was that his pump quit pulling sand, and then his static level came up from 320 feet to 281, and he called the well company to make sure the sounder was not broken. He called Lyle from his kitchen at 6 in the morning and did not say hello. 281, he said. "Say it again. 281 feet. Clean." Merle's voice did something in the middle of it. "It hasn't moved up in 11 years, Lyle. 11 years it's gone one direction." Neither of them said anything for a while. "I'm going to go buy heifers," Merle said. "I'm 74 years old, and I'm going to go buy heifers. And everybody's going to say, 'I've lost it.' Buy them. I'm going to." Garrett came out on a Thursday in the last week of July, at about 8 in the evening, alone, in his own truck, instead of the company one. Lyle was at the 3rd dam pulling a willow stub out of the outlet so it would not cut a channel. He straightened up and stood there with mud to his elbows, and did not go to meet him. Garrett walked out across the flat in his good boots and ruined them in the first 40 feet, and kept coming. He stopped and looked at the water. 70 acres of it in a thin, bright sheet with grass standing up through it in patches, and green willow 4 feet high along the braids, where there had been dead gray stobs, and the sound of it running over the second rock lip carrying across the whole flat. "Josie's got a spreadsheet," he said. "I know. She showed me it's got colors in it. She made me look at it 4 times. Garrett put his hands on his hips and kept looking at the water. "Dad, I signed that complaint. I saw. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I fought it, because I did fight it, and I lost, and then I signed it anyway, and those 2 things don't cancel out." "No," Lyle said, "they don't." Garrett was quiet for a bit. "I've got a question," he said. "It's not about the land." "All right. When I was 15, you took me out to the shop, and you tried to tell me something, and you got about 2 sentences into it, and then you sent me to get a wrench that we both already knew where it was. And when I came back, you were talking about something else." Garrett's jaw was tight. "I've thought about that maybe once a month for 26 years. What were you going to say?" Lyle stood in the water with a willow stub in his hand. "I was going to tell you I ran the machine that straightened this creek," he said. In 1981. 11 miles of it. I took the money, and I knew what it was going to do while I was doing it. Garrett did not move. And I couldn't get it out, Lyle said. Because you were 15 and you thought I hung the moon, and I decided I'd rather lie to you than watch your face change. And then I made that same decision about 400 more times, until it wasn't a decision anymore, it was just how I talked to you. The water ran over the rock lip, and the light went orange over the rim. That's the whole thing, Lyle said. That's what all this is. Garrett looked down at his ruined boots. You could have said it, he said. I know. I'd have been all right. I know that too. Now. They stood out there until it got dark enough that Garrett had to use his phone to find the truck. The written finding came in the second week of August. It ran 19 pages, and it said, in the language such things are said in, that water applied to the 90 acres through the structures on the property constituted a beneficial use for fish and wildlife habitat, that the 1893 priority date remained in full force and effect, and that the complaint was dismissed. The oldest water right in the valley belonged to a man with $600 and no house. Nadine wanted to have a supper for it at the store. Merle wanted to buy a bull. Josie wanted to put it in the county paper. Lyle drove out and found Delia at the second dam with a temperature logger in her hand, and he stood on the bank until she noticed him. Congratulations, she said. I've got a question, and it's a lawyer question, and you're not a lawyer. Ask it anyway. How does a man give a water right away? Lyle said, in a manner that cannot be taken back. Not by me, not by my son, not by anybody who comes after either one of us forever. Delia set the temperature logger down on the bank very carefully, which was what she did instead of sitting down hard. You're asking about an in-stream transfer, she said. I'm asking about giving it away for good. That's what it is. She wiped her hands on her pants. You convert the right from irrigation to in-stream use, and you transfer it to the state. The state holds it in trust. The priority date rides along with it, which is the whole point, because your priority date is 1893 and there is nothing in this basin older than that. It means the creek is legally first in line. In the driest August anybody ever sees, the water stays in the creek and every pump in the valley waits behind it. Can it be undone? Not by you, not by an heir, not by a buyer. It leaves your hands and it does not come back. Delia looked at him. Mr. Odegaard, do you understand what that right is worth? Right now, today, on the open market, with that priority date, in this basin, I have watched a junior right 1/10 that size sell for $400,000. How long does it take? 6 months if the paperwork is clean. Lyle said. It took 9 weeks. He signed the last page on the 22nd of October, 1 year to the day from the night he turned the crate over, at a desk in a state office with a ballpoint pen that skipped. And then he drove home and swept out the feed store because it was Saturday. Nadine did not speak to him for 2 days. On the third day, she came upstairs with a plate of food she had not asked whether he wanted, set it on the hot plate, and said, $400,000. About that? You live in a room over a feed store. I do. You've got a truck that won't start on flat ground. That's true. And you gave it to a creek. She stood there with her arms crossed. I want to be furious with you, and I can't get there, and I've been trying for 3 days, and it's ruining my sleep. Come out Saturday, Lyle said. It's louder now. Merle took it differently. He was standing in his own seep when Lyle told him which was the part that made it possible to say. The seep came out of a bench at the bottom of Merle's place, and it had been a dry rock face with a rust stain on it since 1986. And by the second week of September it was putting out enough water to run a wet track 60 yards down the draw and make the grass green in a line you could see from the road. Merle had been standing in it, in his boots, on and off, for 3 weeks. You gave it to the state? He said. I gave it to the creek. The state just holds the paper. Merle bent down and put his hand in the water coming out of the rock. He held it there a while. I hated you for 30 years, he said. I want you to know I was right to. You were. Well. Merle straightened up and shook his hand dry. Now shut up and hold the post. I want a fence around this before somebody's cows tromp it into a mud hole. Josie was the hard one. She was 13 by then, and she came into the feed store on a Wednesday after school with her spreadsheet printed out on paper, because she wanted to slap something down on a counter. And she slapped it down on the counter. You gave it away. I did. That was ours. It was mine, Lyle said, for about 6 weeks. Dad said it was worth more than his house. It was worth more than every house on this street put together. Then why? Her chin was going, and she was furious about that on top of everything else. You live over a feed store. You eat off a hot plate, and you could have sold it and bought a house and had, I don't know, a couch. Lyle came around the counter and pulled out the stool he sat on to break down invoices and turned it toward her. Sit down a minute, he said. She sat down because she was 13 and still did what he said. If I sell that right, it goes to whoever pays the most, and whoever pays the most is whoever wants to move that water somewhere else, he said. And in 20 years you'd be standing where you're standing now, holding a spreadsheet, watching some outfit pump it. And you'd say my grandpa had it. He had the whole thing in his hand for 6 weeks, and he sold it for a couch. Josie looked at the floor. I've owned 3 things in my life that mattered, Lyle said. A wife, a house, and that right. I lost the first 2, and I don't get them back. The third one I got to decide about. That's it. That's the entire reason. It's still not fair. No, he said, but it's finished. And finished is the rarest thing there is. The outfit did not get its wells. They could not get them because the mitigation math stopped working the day the 1893 right went in stream, and there was nothing left in that basin cheap enough to make it work again. Vance Cluse took 420 acres out of alfalfa and put it in dry land wheat and grass seed, and he let go 41 people over 18 months instead of the 60 everybody feared, and he did it by cutting his own package first, which Lyle only found out about 2 years later, from somebody else. He came out one more time, in the spring, and stood at the fence and looked at the water without getting out of the truck for a while. You cost me a lot of money, he said finally. I know it. You cost my board more, and they'll be fine, and I want that on the record too. Cluse put an elbow out the window. I've got a question, and it's the only one I actually came out here for. Did you know, when you bought it for $400? Did you know about the priority date? No, Lyle said. Come on. I did not know that right existed until a certified letter told me somebody wanted to cancel it. Lyle put his hand on the fence post. I bought 90 acres because it was the piece of this valley I broke, and it was the only piece I could afford. That's all that was. Everything after that was luck and other people. Cluse looked at him for a long moment. That's worse, somehow, he said. I know. Garrett quit in February. He did not announce it, and he did not make a speech about it. He took a job with the Watershed Council for $18,000 a year less, which meant selling the second truck and taking Josie out of the traveling volleyball program. And Josie found out why in April and did not complain about it once, which Lyle heard about from Nadine, who heard it from the woman who cut Garrett's hair. The first Saturday he came out with the council, he brought his own post pounder and worked from 8 until dark and said maybe 40 words all day. At the end of it, he stood at the tailgate with his hands hanging and looked out at the flat. How many now? He said. 9 on our stretch. Delia's got sign on 4 more miles down past the bridge. They just went, Lyle said. That's what they do. You give the young ones somewhere to go, and they go find it and they start over. Nobody has to drive them there. Garrett nodded slowly. Dad, he said, you don't have to. I'm going to, Garrett said. And then we're never going to do this again, because I can't take it twice. He kept looking at the water. I sold the house because the numbers said to, and I've told myself that for 4 years, and about 11 months ago, I stopped believing it. The truth is, I was mad at you and I didn't know what for, and I had a piece of paper that let me do something about it while you were asleep in a hospital. Lyle stood there. That's all, Garrett said. You don't have to answer it. I'm not going to answer it, Lyle said. I'm going to say something else. You've got your mother's chin, and I've been looking at it for 41 years and never told you, and it's the best thing that ever happened to my face. Garrett laughed once, wet and short, and put his hand over his eyes, and then he went and loaded the post pounder. 3 summers later, there were 31 beaver dams on 9 miles of that creek. 2 animals became a colony, and the colony sent out yearlings. And the yearlings went upstream and downstream and found the quiet water and the willow that had come back, and they did what they do. Nobody moved a single one of them after the first two. Delia's project got its funding renewed twice and then written into the district's own budget, which she said was the closest thing to immortality a state biologist ever gets. 70 acres of white alkali came back as wet meadow, grass to the knee by June, with willow 8 and 10 feet high in the braids, and the ground under it black instead of gray. 4 other landowners in that valley put structures in on their own places, and then 11. And the county eventually put Lyle on a contract at $190 a day to walk other people's creeks and tell them where the water wanted to go. It was the only skill he had ever had. It had taken 69 years for anybody to pay him for it directly. He turned down half the days they offered him. The other half he spent driving. There was a young couple, 2 counties over, who had bought 160 acres of the same kind of ruined bottom with money they did not have, because it was the only ground they could afford. And somebody gave them his name. They called and apologized before they even asked. They said up front they could not pay him. Lyle drove out on his own diesel and walked their ground for 2 days and found 4 old braids and 1 place with clean gravel and 7 inches of fall over 300 feet, and he wrote it all in a notebook and left the notebook with them. "What do we owe you?" the young man said. "Buy a hand level," Lyle said. "They're $40, and find out who's below you on that creek and go tell them what you're doing before they hear it from somebody else." Josie was 15 when he gave her the wrench. She had 6 notebooks by then, filled, dated, no guessing, and she had presented the dam count data at a watershed conference in front of 200 adults, with her hands shaking. And she had been accepted into a summer program at the university that she was pretending not to be excited about. They were sitting on the tailgate at the north fence in the last week of July. Lyle took the brass T-handle out of his coat pocket, where it had ridden every working day since 1983, and set it on the tailgate between them. Josie picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. "What's it open?" "Nothing," Lyle said. "The district went to hydraulic gates in 2009. There is not one gate left in this county that takes that wrench." "Then why do you carry it?" "I carried it for 41 years, because it meant the water did what I told it." He nodded at the flat, at the standing sheet of it, at the green line of willow running away east. "Then I spent a year finding out that was never the job. The job is finding out where it already wants to go, and getting out of the way." Josie turned it over in her hands. "It doesn't open anything anymore," she said. "That's the good part," Lyle said. "Anything that opens can be closed by the next fella. This can't. Neither can that paper. That's the only reason either one of them is worth handing you." She held on to it. "Grandpa," she said, "are you sorry?" About 1981. Lyle thought about it for a while because she had earned an actual answer. "Every day for 40 years, he said. "And then I bought 90 acres for $411. And it turns out being sorry is not worth one thing on its own. It's a feeling. Feelings don't wet any ground." He put his hands on his knees. "You want to know what I learned out here that I didn't know at 23? Water never argues. It doesn't get even, and it doesn't hold a grudge. It just keeps feeling around for the low place until it finds one, and then it goes. And it's been doing that since before there were people to watch it. All I ever had to do was give it somewhere low to go." Josie put the wrench in her jacket pocket and left her hand on it. In September, the district sent a young man out with a flatbed scanner and a folding table. They wanted the notebooks, all 41 of them. The state had cited Lyle's numbers in a 19-page finding, and now 4 different agencies wanted the record underneath it, and the district, which had once held out its hand at the door for a brass wrench, wanted every page of it in a public archive, with his name across the top. The young man set up in the feed store because the room upstairs was too small. Nadine moved a pallet of mineral tubs to make room for the table, and it took him 9 days. Lyle sat across from him for most of it, drinking coffee, watching 41 years go through a scanner, 1 page at a time. April of 1988. October of 2003. The week in February of 2010, when he had written the numbers sitting in the truck with the heater running because his hands would not work outside. "Sir," the young man said on the 6th day, "some of these pages have grocery lists on them. Corrine wrote those. Do you want me to leave them out?" Lyle thought about it for a second. "No," he said. Scan them. He never explained why, and nobody ever asked him. And they are still in there. If you pull the public record for flows on that reach for the second week of June, 1992, you will find his measurements in pencil, and down the right margin in a different hand it says coffee, thread, birthday candles. Call your mother. In the last week of August that year, Lyle drove out to the county bridge. It was the same bend where he had stood in his boots on cracked gray mud 4 years before, and heard a grasshopper leave the bank. He parked on the shoulder and let the tailgate down and sat on it and did not walk down. Under the bridge, in the bottom of a bed that had been dust every August since 1986, 6 Mile Creek was running. It was not much. 2 feet wide in most places and 4 inches deep, brown and clear at the same time, going over a gravel bar in 100 small places at once. It had been running for 19 days, and Delia said it would go until the second week of September, and next year it would go longer, and the year after that longer still, and that in about 40 years if nobody undid any of it. That creek would run the whole reach all summer the way it had before he ever climbed onto a machine. He would not be there to write that number down. Somebody would. He did not look at the water. Looking at it was the part of the job he had never actually needed, and he had done it his whole life anyway. He put his hands in his coat pockets. The right one was empty, and had been for a month, and it was going to stay that way. Then he sat still on the tailgate in the last of the light and listened to a creek run in August. It was not loud. It did not need to be.